Life is suffering. So why are we here? A Buddhist perspective. Something feels off, even when life looks just fine. Most people think suffering only shows up when something goes wrong. When a loved one falls ill, when a relationship ends, when a plan collapses, or a dream fades. We assume pain has to be loud, dramatic, visible, and explainable. But often, the discomfort runs much quieter than that, and much deeper. There's a kind of unease that appears when nothing is obviously wrong, when life is stable, when the boxes are checked: job, family, health, routine, when everything seems fine, and yet something still feels incomplete. This kind of suffering is harder to notice, and even harder to name. It's not crisis. It's not despair. It's more like a subtle restlessness beneath the surface of daily life. A quiet question that lingers between tasks, behind smiles, beneath the comfort. It might come as a vague boredom that settles in after achieving something long desired, or as a strange hollowness, even in moments that are supposed to feel full, or simply as a passing thought, in the middle of a conversation, while brushing your teeth, or lying in bed. Why doesn't this feel like enough? Not because something is missing on the outside, but because something feels unsettled on the inside. This isn't a personal flaw. It's not a sign of failure. It's simply a part of human experience that few people talk about, because it's not dramatic enough to count as real suffering, yet not light enough to fully ignore. And strangely, this is exactly where the Buddha began. Not with grand ideas, not with abstract theories, but with a simple, honest observation. There is suffering. Not because we are being punished, not because life is wrong, but because the things we hold on to, comfort, peace, happiness, are always shifting. Even the best parts of life can't offer lasting certainty. Even joy is marked by change. That doesn't mean something is broken. It means something in us is reaching for solid ground in a world that never stands still. And if that's true, if even our most stable days are touched by this quiet unease, then a deeper question begins to emerge. Why do we keep returning to this experience? Why are we born into a life where nothing fully stays? Why do we keep going, day after day, even when part of us senses the incompleteness? This isn't a question of philosophy. It's a question that lives in the heart of ordinary days. And beginning to ask it, gently, sincerely, is often the first step toward a new kind of understanding. One that doesn't offer escape, but opens the door to seeing life more clearly. What the Buddha really meant by suffering. Let's take a moment to look more closely at what this idea of suffering really points to in early Buddhist thought. Many people misunderstand this teaching. They hear the phrase and assume that Buddhism is pessimistic, that it sees life as nothing but pain, emptiness, and despair. But that's not what these early teachings were trying to say. They weren't offering a hopeless view of life. Instead, they were describing something very human, a quiet struggle that runs underneath even the most ordinary experiences. In the original Pali language, the word used was dukkha, and while it's often translated as suffering, the meaning is much broader. Dukkha doesn't only refer to obvious pain or grief, it speaks to a deeper tension, a basic restlessness in the mind, a subtle discontent that can be present even when things are going well. Even when life seems fine on the outside, there can still be this quiet friction on the inside, like something doesn't quite settle. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the feeling that your mind is never fully where you are. You get the thing you wanted, a new gadget, a promotion, a vacation, and for a little while, it's satisfying. But then your attention shifts, the excitement fades, or you find yourself already looking for what's next. Sometimes you're surrounded by people you care about, but part of you still feels distant. The moment is good, but you're not fully in it. That's dukkha. Not because anything is wrong, but because the mind keeps leaning away from where it is. The early Buddhist teachings weren't criticizing us for this. They were just describing it, describing how our minds naturally react to change. How we chase pleasure, avoid discomfort, and try to make life stable, even though nothing in life ever stays the same. Everything shifts. The joy we hope will last fades. The people we love change. The things we cling to eventually slip through our fingers. And so the mind keeps searching, not out of greed and not because we're broken, but because we're trying to find stability in a world that doesn't offer it. This search, this hunger for something solid in the middle of change, is what makes dukkha feel so persistent. It isn't just about pain. It's about the way even pleasant things don't quite bring the lasting peace we expect. It's about how easily the mind gets pulled back into wanting, even after it's had enough. But here's the important part. This teaching was never meant to stop there. It didn't end with life as dukkha. It went further. It said, there's a path through it. Not by fixing the world outside, but by understanding how we respond to the world inside. The dissatisfaction itself isn't the deepest problem. The suffering comes from how we relate to it, how we resist, how we cling, how we repeat the same patterns without seeing them. So no, this isn't a message of despair. It's a call to clarity, a way of turning toward that ache with gentle attention instead of blame or fear. Because once we really begin to notice how this unease works, we can stop feeding it. And that's when things begin to change. But then a deeper curiosity begins to rise. If this restlessness is always just under the surface, why do we keep walking the same path? Why do we keep getting caught in the same patterns? That's what we'll begin to reflect on next. Why we keep coming back, even when it hurts. If life never quite feels complete, if there's always that subtle ache, that quiet emptiness underneath even our best days, why do we keep chasing it? Why do we wake up day after day and do it all over again? Why do we keep reaching for the next thing, the next feeling, the next version of ourselves, as if it will finally make everything feel whole? In Buddhist teachings, there's something called the 12 links of dependent origination. It sounds technical, but its message is deeply human. It describes how we are not only born into this world once, but how, in our minds, we are constantly being born again and again. Not through some mystical process, but through a very real and familiar pattern of thought, emotion, and habit. It begins with something simple, not seeing clearly. The Buddha called this ignorance, not in a judgmental way, but as a gentle observation. We often don't understand how our minds work. We don't see the process that keeps pulling us back into the same loop. So we act from habit. Patterns we've learned, stories we've told ourselves. And slowly, these habits start to build something. A sense of self. A me. A person with a past, a future, a name, a role. It feels solid, real, but it's always shifting. At the heart of this cycle is craving, a longing for things to be different or for them to stay the same. We crave to feel safe, to be loved, to matter. We crave to avoid pain, to control outcomes, to escape uncertainty. And from craving comes clinging. We cling to people, ideas, beliefs, routines. We cling to our identities, the image of who we think we are. And sometimes, we even cling to our pain, because at least it's familiar. Every time we say, "I need this to feel okay," we give birth to another version of ourselves, another role to maintain, another identity to protect. This is what the Buddha meant by becoming. We are always in the process of becoming someone, trying to secure a version of life that never quite stays still. And the strangest part, even when we've seen that this cycle doesn't work, even when we've felt its emptiness, we keep repeating it. We keep chasing. We reach for the same promises. We replay the same stories. Not because we're weak or broken, but because we're human. Because this is what minds do when they haven't yet seen the deeper pattern beneath the surface. The Buddha didn't blame us for this. He didn't say we were wrong for wanting happiness. He simply invited us to look more closely, to see that craving leads to clinging, that clinging leads to suffering, and that suffering keeps the cycle going, unless we learn to relate to it differently. Here's the turning point. Once we see the loop clearly, it begins to loosen, not through force, not by rejecting life, but through awareness. We don't have to keep running the same script. We don't have to be reborn, moment by moment, into the same identity, the same fear, the same longing. There's another way. But before we explore that, let's pause and ask something even deeper. If I wasn't born just to suffer, then what was I born for? Let's stay with that for a moment. You weren't born to suffer. You were born to wake up. At some point, quietly and without warning, a question enters the heart. Was I born just to suffer? It doesn't always come during a crisis. Sometimes it arrives during a quiet evening, or after a long-awaited success that leaves you unexpectedly hollow, or when you're surrounded by people but still feel alone. It doesn't announce itself. It lingers. And it stays until you're ready to listen. Over time, through the lens of the Buddha's teachings, I began to see this question differently. You weren't born as punishment. You weren't placed here to be tested. And you're not here to repay some unseen debt. You suffer not because life is wrong, but because life is always moving. And the mind is still learning how to meet that movement with understanding. Everything we touch in this world changes. Our bodies, our moods, our relationships, our roles, all shift and evolve. And when we try to hold on to what cannot stay, pain becomes part of the experience. But that pain, the Buddha taught, isn't meaningless. It's not here to crush you. It's here to wake you up. It wakes you to impermanence, not to frighten you, but to soften your grip, to remind you that clinging cannot bring peace, and that peace does not depend on control. We suffer because the mind is caught in a rhythm, craving what feels good, resisting what feels bad, forgetting the nature of things. And there's no shame in that. It's simply how the cycle turns. But within this human life lies something rare: the ability to see the cycle as it's happening, to notice the loop, and step outside it, if only for a moment. The Buddha described many realms of existence: some filled with pleasure, others with torment. But the human realm stands in the middle, just enough comfort to reflect, just enough difficulty to seek a different way. That's what makes this life so valuable. Not because it's easy, but because it holds the possibility of awakening. You weren't born to become perfect. You weren't born to impress anyone. You were born with the capacity to understand, to turn toward your experience, whatever it is, and meet it with wisdom and care, to suffer less blindly, to love more wisely, to live more gently. You weren't born to suffer. You were born into suffering, as all beings are. But you carry within you the ability to respond to it differently. And maybe that's the real purpose, not to avoid the pain, but to no longer be ruled by it, to let it guide you toward something deeper, quieter, and more real. And now, a new question begins to emerge, not one of fear, but of intention. If life isn't about chasing after some final answer, then how do we live in a way that feels steady, sincere, and meaningful? That question is worth sitting with. You don't need to find the meaning. You just need to show up. By now, perhaps some of our earlier ideas about life have begun to shift. Maybe you've let go of the belief that life is supposed to be perfect, or the fear that suffering means you've failed, or the pressure to fulfill some grand spiritual purpose. But even after all that, a quiet question can remain. If I wasn't born just to suffer, and I wasn't born for some cosmic mission, then what is all this for? It's a question many of us ask, especially when life feels ordinary, unclear, or stuck. We often think the answer lies somewhere far away. That meaning must be hidden in a big idea, a breakthrough, or a dramatic moment of awakening. But in the Buddhist path, meaning isn't something we find in the distance. It's something that begins to emerge the moment we stop searching and start paying attention. Not to theories, not to ideals, but to what's actually here. This breath, this body, this task in front of you, this life, as it already is. We don't need to become someone different to meet life in a meaningful way. We don't need to escape the confusion or avoid the mess. We just need to learn how to be present with it. Presence may sound simple, but it's not passive. It takes real effort to stay with life as it unfolds, without reaching, without resisting. It means noticing what's here without immediately trying to fix, improve, or escape it. And that, in itself, is practice. The Buddha didn't give us a final answer to the question of life's meaning. He gave us a path, a way to walk through life with awareness, steadiness, and compassion. He pointed to 4 simple truths. There is suffering. There is a cause. There is a way that suffering can end. And there is a path that leads there. One step, one breath, one moment at a time. You don't need to make every moment profound. You don't need to find the perfect answer. You just need to show up for the life you already have. Not perfectly, not always calmly, but sincerely. Because when you begin to live with this kind of attention, something subtle changes. Not outside, but within. You stop trying to force life to give you meaning, and instead, you begin to meet it with meaning. Right here, in this small, ordinary, precious moment. And that, quietly, steadily, may be more than enough.